it's an interesting comparison, but you know what? I'm gonna qualify it because, and I'm very good friends with Chris, and Chris will agree with me. I don't think I've ever seen Chris really peak himself out at the best he could be. I think Chris was really good at a couple of shows that he did very well at, especially when he came in second in the Olympia. But I think that he was never his best. I don't think I ever saw Chris at his best, the best he could be, because he was always like, battling, going out, maybe just having some setbacks, women problems and stuff like that. I don't think that he ever was focused enough to be his absolute best. And I don't think he ever trained, consistently, in the sense where he had no drama in his life for like a good stretch, like 2-3 years, where every day was perfect. I just don't think he ever had that. So having said that, I think Phil was much more hyper-focused on what he had to do. And I think that Phil at his best was better than Chris at his best because of that. I would have loved, and I know Dorian and I discussed this, we would have loved to seen Chris achieve his best ever and be his best, because I think at his best, he probably would have won a few Olympias, and he knows that. And I think at his very best, he might have been better than Phil, because he was a lot wider than Phil, structurally speaking. Phil maximized his physique, and really, no pun intended, he embraced his gifts, and his gifts were crazy conditioning, cartoonish, roundish muscle, even though he's a little narrow. And so at his best, he was beautiful to look at, and it was very, it was almost like your eyes got drawn to his physique because he had such clean lines. So I got to give it to Phil. He is a 7-time Mr. Olympia, so that proves it, even though Chris did compete in an era where the guys were probably a little better. But having said that, I don't think Chris was ever at his all-time best, and I don't think he achieved what he could have had he, dedicated himself 100%. So unfortunately, I'll have to say Phil, but with the proviso that I think that Chris had the ability to possibly be better and to win a few Olympias, but he just never embraced that reality.
I'm going to add one more qualifier to that as well. This is going to be a random one. A shout out to those who grew up in the 80s. Mike Tyson's Punch Out. You remember Mike Tyson's Punch Out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know how I stumbled upon it the other day, but something reminded me of Prime Phil Heath. If you remember, Mike Tyson in that video game was able to knock you out with one punch, right? That was right. Round one, whatever. When you turned pink and you punched, you were down. You were finished, whatever. I feel like Phil Heath, if you're talking about this latest iteration of, whatever generation you want to call it, he had that punch out ability. He had the knockout ability. He had those knockout shots that I think really separated him, that put him in a different class, in my opinion. So, again, that's the question I would ask you. Do you think that Chris Cormier at his absolute best had those clear knockout shots that would have just, when he did it, you saw it, you knew it, and the show was over?
He didn't have one or two shots, but he was so good from every angle because he knew how to present his physique. And if he would have had another 15 pounds of muscle on his frame with peaked out conditioning, which he never had perfect conditioning, I think he would have been very difficult to beat. I think he easily would have won a couple of Olympias. I truly, truly believe it. He was letting guys beat him that should never have beat him because he never was showing up at his best. And he knows that. And it was frustrating for him because he knows he shouldn't have lost to those guys. But whatever was going on in his life at the time, now looking back, if he had the mindset now that he had back then, if he was able to take his older self and put it into his younger body, who knows how many Olympias this guy would have won. He was really good, and he had really good lines. And like I said, he really knew how to show off his physique. It was beautiful. I don't know. I would have loved to seen it, but we didn't see it. So we did see Phil Heath at his best, and that was super impressive. So
I have to say, of all the cross-generational comparisons, that was probably the most robust, and probably one of the more intellectually stimulating ones that I've seen you kind of have to dig into your bag for. Usually, I give you these cross-generation comparisons, you kind of shrug it off like, we didn't see it. So
Chris didn't have any weaknesses. That's the And you say to yourself, well, if he had no weaknesses and he had such good lines, he was such a good poser, why didn't he win more shows? Because he always left the door open, Yeah. And because of that, he would get beat by guys like Dexter that he shouldn't have lost to because Dexter was flawless,
there, right?
And that had a really, I've discussed this with Chris. It bothered him. Of course it bothered him. He knew. He knows. Looking back on it, it probably I would bet it was his one regret, in bodybuilding, because Chris trained hard. In the gym, no one trained harder than Chris, and he ate his food. He just was just easily distracted, and that was the problem.
Also, very underrated poser. I mean, we saw over the last few years he was at an Oxygen gym, teaching them all the tools that obviously he developed, he acquired, and imparting that upon the next generation. So cool, great cross-generational comparison. What do you guys think? Prime Chris Cormier, prime Phil Heath. Comment below. We'll see what you all think.